What does a place sound like when it becomes part of a band's identity? And how can a rock group turn quiet observation, Southern atmosphere, and uncertainty into music that feels almost timeless? In the early 1990s, REM seemed to have discovered an answer. Their music carried a particular kind of emotional weight, not loud or theatrical, but subtle, spacious, and deeply connected to the American South. Behind the jangling guitars and Michael Stipe's distinctive voice was a world of small-town landscapes, changing seasons, restless thoughts, and memories that seemed just out of reach. This was REM at a fascinating point in their journey, when their sound had grown from underground alternative rock into something much larger. But the deeper story was not simply about success. It was about atmosphere. REM came from Athens, Georgia, a college town with a creative culture that helped shape the band's earliest identity. Guitarist Peter Buck, bassist Mike Mills, drummer Bill Berry, and vocalist Michael Stipe developed a sound that felt different from much of mainstream rock. The guitars were bright but never overly polished. The rhythm section could be energetic without dominating the arrangement. And Stipe's voice often seemed less interested in delivering a straightforward message than in creating a feeling. That approach became especially powerful as REM entered the 1990s. Their music could feel distinctly American without relying on obvious musical stereotypes. There were traces of Southern tradition, folk music, country textures, and college rock experimentation, but everything passed through REM's own musical language. Few people noticed how important that balance would become. Then came one of the defining qualities of their early 90s sound: space. REM understood that a song did not need to fill every second with sound. Peter Buck's guitar work often created an open landscape, allowing individual notes and chords to breathe. Mike Mills and Bill Berry provided a foundation that could move naturally underneath it, while Stipe added a voice that could make ordinary phrases feel strangely distant and personal. This combination gave the music a sense of motion without requiring constant intensity. You could imagine highways, quiet neighborhoods, old buildings, changing skies, or a southern town slowly disappearing in the distance. The music was not simply describing these places. It was creating an emotional version of them. But that wasn't the full story. REM's Southern character was never simply about geography. It was also about memory. Their songs often carried the feeling of looking backward while still moving forward. There was warmth, but also uncertainty. There was beauty, but it could feel fleeting. That tension helped separate REM from many of their contemporaries. They were capable of making alternative rock accessible to a huge audience without removing the mystery that made the music interesting in the first place. The early 1990s became an especially important period because REM had reached a point where their artistic instincts and wider cultural influence were meeting at exactly the right moment. Their music could exist on major radio stations while still retaining the unusual qualities that had defined them from the beginning. And perhaps that is why the era continues to resonate. REM did not make the South sound like a postcard. They made it sound like a memory, familiar, beautiful, complicated, and constantly changing. Their influence reached far beyond individual songs. REM demonstrated that alternative rock could become culturally significant without abandoning subtlety. Their approach showed younger musicians that guitars could create atmosphere, that rhythm could remain understated, and that emotional depth did not require grand gestures. The most remarkable part is how naturally they achieved it. Nothing needed to announce itself. The guitar shimmered. The drums moved with quiet confidence. The bass gave the songs their shape. And Stipe's voice floated through the center, leaving enough room for listeners to create their own interpretations. What happened next changed the way many people understood alternative rock. REM proved that a band could become enormous while still protecting a sense of mystery. Looking back, the early 90s REM sound feels less like a specific musical trend and more like a carefully preserved atmosphere. It captures a moment when American alternative rock was expanding, while REM remained deeply connected to the places and ideas that shaped them. That is the lasting beauty of their Southern melancholy. It was never simply sadness, and it was never simply nostalgia. It was the feeling of standing somewhere familiar and realizing that everything around you is quietly changing. REM turned that feeling into music. And decades later, those open guitars, measured rhythms, and unmistakable vocals still create the same strange sensation: a road stretching ahead, a memory fading behind, and a landscape that somehow sounds exactly like itself.